Welcome to For Book Lovers Only Live Radio, where we discuss amazing books written by talented authors. For Book Lovers Only Live Radio is a proud member of the Village Connector Media Network. If you love books, we have a home for you. Now time for your host and chief book lover, Rob Brown.
Hello and welcome to For Book Lovers Only Live Radio, where if you love books, we have a home for you. My name is Rob Brown, your internet radio host and chief book lover, hoping that you all are having a wonderful Christmas Eve. Today is going to be a great episode. We're interviewing our first author of the Western genre, Fred Staff in Bolivia. We are super excited to be chatting with him via Skype in just a few moments. But before we begin, I want to let book lovers and in particular authors who may be watching our broadcast or listening to it right now about the Texas Authors Incorporated. It's a nonprofit organization out of Austin, Texas, which is designed to help Texas authors better market and sell their books. Alan Bourgeois is the founder of Texas Authors Incorporated, and via his invite about a year ago, I had the distinct pleasure of being a speaker at their author marketing event in July of this year. It was absolutely phenomenal. I met some great authors there, Becky Willis, Michael Farlow, who both appeared on the show a few weeks ago, Grace Allison, Sherry Masonave, and many others. I learned a lot about myself, about marketing, and even earned my author marketing certificate while I was there. It is an absolutely great organization. If you're an author, you should seriously consider attending their author marketing event in 2018. It's going to be from July 27th to the 29th in Dallas, Texas at the Dallas Marriott in Las Colinas. I guarantee if you are an author, you will gain tremendous value from the lineup of speakers that will be present there. I'm probably going to be speaking there again along with other industry experts to help you sell more books. Visit texasauthors.com to learn more about the organization. That's txauthors.com. And 2018 authors.marketing to get registered for next year's marketing event. It's a truly worthwhile investment, and you'll be glad you did. And afterwards, I guarantee you'll be looking forward to attending in 2019. Now, today's guest author is a retired history teacher. He was born and raised in what was Native American territory. He's always loved Westerns and was fortunate enough to have a great Western history teacher in Royce Peterson while he attended the University of Central Oklahoma. He does a lot of research and tries to ensure that all he writes either did happen or could have happened. We'll be discussing his series about Bass Reeves, who is the first African-American Deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi River. The things that Deputy Reeves did are just the stuff of legend. I was blown away when I learned about him and was reading these books. We'll be chatting with our guest about him today. Historical novelist Fred Staff has written 4 books about Deputy Reeves: Young Bass Reeves, and Katie Quantrill, which is a fiction book, Bass Reeves Lawman, and Judge Parker and Bass Reeves. And he'll be joining us in just a few moments.
Hello.
Hello, Fred.
Yes. How are you, Rob?
Fred, this is Rob for Book Lovers Only Live Radio. We are so excited to have you on our show today.
Well, thank you. I'm more than excited to be there, and I'd like to just say ho, ho, ho to you because this is a great time of the year, and to you and to your listeners, I wish you well and a great Merry Christmas and an upcoming Happy New Year.
Well, thank you so much, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you as well. Down there in Bolivia, you are our first author that we've interviewed in Bolivia, so we're excited about that as well.
Thank you. I'm one of the few you'll find here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself when you started writing. I know you taught history, but you're also an author. When did you start writing?
I started writing in 2012. I had heard a story in 1993 in Potosi, Bolivia. It was a fantastic story, and for all those years, I kept running it through my mind, saying it's got to be written. And we had a break at school, and I said, what am I going to do with my time? And I said, I think I'll write. Now, I'd never written a book, and I had a friend named Dennis Hambright, who's a great author and a great reader, and he'd always encouraged me to write. And so I said, well, I'll try. And so I did, and unfortunately, it became a bestseller, even here in Bolivia, where very few people read English, and very few people read, amazingly enough. It did also very well in the United States, and that encouraged me to go on. Without that, I probably would have never written another book.
So wow, so like right out the bat, you're like a bestseller. That is a great story.
Yeah.
And then you decided to write about Deputy Bass Reeves. Tell us about. I'm very intrigued by this because this is very educational for me when I was preparing for this interview and I was reading the books. And my dad loves the books. He loves learning about Bass Reeves as well. Tell me about your research about this amazing human.
Okay, when I was in the University of Central Oklahoma, I had one of the great Western history teachers of all times. He was an amazing man. He could rattle off stories for hours. Uh, and in my research at the library, I ran across a book about Bass Reeves. I read it and thought, that's fantastic, but I put it aside. When I decided to start writing as an Oklahoman, I know a lot of the outlaw history of Oklahoma. I was raised in Indian country and all that. And a guy that had fascinated me was a guy named Cherokee Bill. I started researching on Cherokee Bill and again ran into the name Bass Reeves. And I said, wait a minute, maybe I need to rethink this. So I did another round of research on him and said, my goodness gracious sakes, this is the most amazing man I've ever read about. And I'm not stretching the point. When you read it, you get the feeling you're reading fiction, but it's actually true. The guy that wrote his biography spent hours. I mean, he must have spent months put together one of the best research papers I ever saw. And then I went together and did more research and found a few things that he had never talked about. One of them is he claims that Bass Reeves was never shot, and I found actually a doctor's diary who treated him for a gunshot wound in the leg and couldn't heal it, couldn't take the bullet out because it was too close to the vein. And later on, in one of his obituaries, it says that he died with a slug in him. So I just love to get into research and find things like that. Bass Reeves was probably the first black marshal west of the Mississippi River. He was brought in mainly because of his great ability to speak 5 languages, 5 Indian languages. He'd lived with the Indians for several years before the end of slavery. He then moved to Arkansas. He made a lot of money. Not a lot. In those days, it would have been a lot. He made money leading law enforcement officers into Indian territory. Why? Because white law enforcement officers didn't do very well, because when they tried to talk to Indians, the Indians would just ignore them because the white man that had already been proven was not treating them well. So he was able to converse, and because of his friendship, was very, very effective in bringing outlaws out of the state, or what then was Indian Territory, now eastern Oklahoma. I got just carried away with him. I went and I wrote actually 3 books about him. The first book takes him from the age of about 12 up to mid-30s. The next book took him from the 30s up into his 60s, and the last book takes him to his death, where he died in Muskogee, Oklahoma. He served for over 30 years as a U.S. Marshal. No one's done that. He's became now very, very famous. When I started writing about him, very few people even talked about him. Now there's 3 towns in Oklahoma that have Bass Reeves Days. There's a town in Texas, Paris, Texas, has a Bass Reeves Day. There's several bridges. There's several roads now in Oklahoma named Bass Reeves Road or Bass Reeves Bridge. There's also a $280,000 statue to him in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Of course, he worked out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, where Judge Parker presided over the courts. My third book is entitled Judge Parker and Bass Reeves, because they became not only a two-fisted approach to law enforcement, but they became very good friends. They were so good of friends that actually Bass's son actually worked for Parker as just a clerk. So very tight relationship. And Parker, of course, is tremendously famous because they call him the hanging judge. But in truth of the matter, he was against capital punishment. But it was the law, and the only way that you could clean up the state, which was the area which was just in terrible condition because of the Indian Removal Act, which gave the tribes the authority to have their own law enforcement, their own courts, their own rules, their own regulations, but said you cannot enforce any of your laws against anyone that's not a member of your tribe. Therefore, all the criminals from Kansas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, Missouri went into Oklahoma after they did a crime because they couldn't be prosecuted. That's why the U.S. Marshals were so necessary to go in and try to clean it up. Grant was the one. President Grant was the one that appointed Parker as judge. Before that, they had a judge named Story who was actually impeached because he was a little bit crooked. And Parker came in, was gung ho. Parker ran a court 6 days a week, about 12 hours a day. Unbelievably committed man. Unbelievably ran a tremendous court. Everything went well until actually he started cleaning up so well that the Supreme Court became involved in reviewing a lot of his cases, which slowed a lot of things down.
I see.
Okay, you got anything else, Rob? I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. It's just this is just such intriguing material. I mean, I imagine that a lot of people that are watching and listening have never heard of Bass Reeves, as I've never heard of him until I started reading your books and you and I started conversing. Now, Deputy Reeves, he had arrested about 3,000 outlaws.
Okay, they say that his biography says that has been repeated many times. I kind of disavow that. He probably brought in 3,000, but he probably didn't arrest them because one of his jobs that the marshals had was to take their what they call tumble wagon, which was like a jail on wheels, and go pick up prisoners that were in jail in other places and bring them back to court. So he probably did 3,000. I would imagine he did many hundreds. Don't know that he did 3,000, but that's yet to be proven. He was unbelievably effective. The thing that really impresses you about him, he was a religious man, and actually a lot of times he got into dangerous conditions. He started singing or humming religious songs before he went into battle. Now, the other thing about him is he treated prisoners or treated the people he was after with respect, which was not a common thing. I mean, he actually would tell you, I've got a warrant for your arrest. You can come with me. You can make a choice. You can either get on your horse and ride with me, or I'll hang you over your horse and take you in. And he did that if they didn't want to come. So he was on top of that. Bass Reeves was a big man for the time. He was about 6'2" and weighed about 180 pounds. You got to think in those days, an average man was about 5'6", weighed about 140. So he was a massive man and tremendously strong. In fact, one of the great outlaws he took down, he actually had a drop on him, and he grabbed him by the throat and lifted him clear off the floor with one hand and took the pistol away from the other. So he impressed you when he said, I want you to go with me. I think most people said, I think I'll go. He's just a fascinating man. The more I read about him, the more I began to think he has to be the most amazing man I probably ever researched, and I've done a lot of research. I love to do research, and this guy just knocked me out. And therefore, that's why I wanted to share the story. And it's been well received. I've got my publicist and I have calculated we've got over 40,000 readers on that series. So I feel very, very good about my exposing the people to this. I've always tried to do history where people enjoy it. So when I write historically as well as entertaining. That means I add logical dialogue, I add logical settings, because in his biographies it just says he arrested so and so for so and so and so and so date. Well, how did that happen? Why did it happen? What happened while it was going on?
Right.
And it goes back to uh, Ernest Hemingway, who I love as an author, and he was a newspaper reporter, and he did the very same thing: who, what, where, when, why, how, and that's the way I write it. I tell you the story, uh, and like I say, I do add dialogue. No one knows the dialogue, but it's illogical. If a guy, yeah, I've had a few criticisms about. Sometimes I use curse words, but I kept thinking, if someone shot you in the leg, I don't think you'd say, "Dad gum, I wish you hadn't done that."
You're
Just don't think
probably right
that'd be
about
the
that. Yeah.
response.
Right, absolutely. Now, you've written 4 books about Bass Reeves. As you did your research, did you realize, as you were doing your research, that you're like, "Gosh, there's no way I can do this historic figure justice by writing in just one book?" Or did you how did it blossom into 4 books?
Okay, that's very good. Yes, I got carried away, and all the books are over 150 pages long. I went into great detail, and I didn't think, if I put out a 500-page book that anyone would read it. That scares most people. But my publicist and I have come up with a new deal where we've got a book called The Guns of Bass Reeves, which is the combination of all 3 books. So the one book now will combine all 3 stories. Uh, uh, and, I think it's nearly 400 pages long, but it's the complete story. Now, the 4th book I've written about him, which is Bass Reeves and Katie Quantrell, is basically fiction, but it has a lot of factual historical things in it. And that's the way I try to write. Uh, I wrote that because I had so many people saying I want more about Bass Reeves, and that's what I did. I've got another book started on him that I've been sidelined with, but I'll get that out fairly soon. I've got a book going right now with M. Allen, who's one of the top Western writers. We have combined to write a book that should be out in January. I've got another book that I'm writing with a great researcher that I think I'll have done by sometime in January. Uh, so I kind of stay busy. I enjoy my writing. I enjoy sharing my thoughts and my historical perspective on lots of things.
Now, let me ask you a quick question about Katie Quantrill. Now, that is a historical fiction book. Was there an actual Katie Quantrill, or is she completely fictional?
There's actually Katie Quantrill. She was married at 16 uh, the Quantrill, and actually she did go on raids with them. After he got killed, I understand she just went back into becoming a Missouri widow. But I took her and put her with Bass because it ties in with another book which I wrote, which is called Quantrill's Revenge, which is basically very historical, and it's about the border wars. Uh, I don't know whether your listeners know about the border wars, but it was actually the pre-Civil War that took place between Kansas and Missouri, brought about by the Kansas-Missouri Act, which gave Kansas the right to vote whether they wanted to be slaves or not. The Missourians didn't wanted to be slaves, wanted to be a slave state. The northern states wanted to be a free state, so there was unbelievable conflict. Probably the most violent period of the more than a civil war. I mean, it's bloody, it's nasty, it's terrible, and but Quantrill played a big part in it. And actually, he was a pro. Uh, he was an abolitionist before he got really treated dirty and badly by the Kansans, which were later called the Redlegs, and then he just formed his counter group, which were called the Bushwhackers, and they had some unbelievable violence. Of course, maybe the people know, but they actually wiped out the city of Lawrence, Kansas, at one time.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's that story in itself is amazing, and I tried to, and I used a lot of facts in it, which is going to be contrary to a lot of things that the Kansans think, because
Mm-hmm.
in essence, the Kansans caused this. Uh, the pro, the anti-slavery group caused this thing to take place.
Right. Fred, what would you say has been, as a writer, writing about Bass Reeves, this heroic man, what would you say has been the biggest part of your success?
I think my stories flow. I work very hard on making just flow and very entertaining. I don't write and try to do a lot of uh, uh, planting things in your mind or making you try to dig for it. So many of my reviews talk about how easy the books are to read. Another reason I made them that way, I want young people reading these books. And the first three books, they're absolutely, a kid can read them if they're 12 years old and up and enjoy them and get exposed to a lot of history. One of the great one of the great compliments I ever got. I was in Arkansas, walked into a place. This guy was reading Outlaw, which Bass Reeves Lawman, and I was shocked. It's the first time I ever saw anyone reading my book. I asked him, "What's he doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm a teacher." I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "And I'm reading this book." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because one of the students at school was reading it." And I walked up to him and I said, "Why are you reading it on your break?" Which he said, "No kid ever reads on their break." He said, "It's fantastic." He said, "It's full of history." And the teacher said, "Don't you have to have a history teacher?" And he said, "Yeah, but this book's a lot more interesting." So that was one of the great compliments I ever got, and I just tickled to death. And so I wrote simplistically, directly, with lots of visual things in it, so that young people would read. We're losing a lot of people. A lot of the young people have stopped reading. They've got these blooming things in their hands that they're talking to their friends and neighbors about. I'm sorry, I'm an old teacher. I have to throw that in.
So I imagine that the feedback that you've been getting from the Bass Reeves series has been amazing, because you are educating everyone about this heroic American that most people really don't know about. What are some other things, other feedback that you've been getting from people? I mean, just absolutely amazed by Bass.
Yeah, most 99% of my reviews, and I've had well over 100, 150, I think, talk about thanks for bringing me this story. I'd never heard of this guy before, those kind of things, and you make me want to know more. Interesting enough, someone put a little 15 points about Bass Reeves on a history blog. I started answering the questions, and before long, there was over 175,000 responses on the thing.
Wow.
So I've spread the words got around somewhere. And of course, that thrilled me. I like to share, and that's basically what I did here, and what looks like what's happening. And I'm just tickled about it. And I appreciate the readers. I appreciate their support. I know I couldn't have been there without them, and just happy that I'm making some people's lives a little better.
Well, I know our viewers and listeners are really interested in learning more about Bass Reeves. Do you have more books that you think our viewers and our listeners and our book lovers would like?
Yes, and I've got another deal for you. I just told you about the Guns of Bass Reeves, which is all three books put together. I've written two books about. One is about George Goldsby. It's actually Sergeant Goldsby in the 10th Cavalry is the name of it, and his son ended up being Cherokee Bill. And this was a long research process. Actually, I was writing Cherokee Bill and ran into his father, traced him, and it's an amazing story. At the end of the Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they authorized two mounted black, at that time they were called colored, uh, troops, and they were the 9th and 10th Cavalry. They were located out of Leavenworth, Kansas. Was later moved to Fort Riley, and they actually built most of the telegraph lines, actually built most of the forts, like Fort Sill and so forth and so on. They actually uh, they fought Indians. They also fought the bad men. They rode security on the stagecoach lines. They were an unbelievable thing. And the interesting thing about this guy, uh, Frederick Remington, the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest Western author of all times, actually rode with them and
Oh,
actually
wow.
just adored them. He couldn't believe how dedicated they were, and he also loved the fact that they liked to sing in the evening. And he did a the cover of that book is a picture that I had colorized. It was a sketch that he did that shows the climax of the book, which is a gunfight in a bar in Texas. Again, we're back to military intelligence. The military sent black troops into the Confederate Texas to try to protect them, which was just insane. They ended up having a gunfight in a bar, and that leads into the second part of the story where he has to abandon Cherokee Bill, who was actually called Crawford Goldsby, and psychologically he went nuts and was a psychopathic murderer and was the most feared man in Indian Territory for several years. That's the only adult book I've ever written. I had to write it adult because the man was just wow.
Right.
I spent 4 sessions with psychologists to make sure that I played him and wrote him like he probably should have been. So those two books have been combined into a book called Have Gun Will Travel, and so readers, if you want to, can get actually 5 books and buying 2. Uh, so it's really good. Now another thing, and you asked threw this out. I've written a book called Indomitable, and it's the strongest woman story I've ever read. And let me tell you how that happened. I'm dealing with a production company in Hollywood. They're actually looking at in the process of making movies out of Sergeant Goldsby and Cherokee Bill,
Oh,
both of
great.
them. Uh, and while I was doing it, I sent them about an 80-page thing that I did on Indomitable. And before I sent it to about 5 women that I know and said, "Did I catch this woman's view right?" They went nuts. All of them said, "This is fantastic." They said, "What's the rest of the story?" So I had to write the rest of the book. Uh, she is the toughest. I don't think there's a man walking that could go through what she went through. You
Wow.
have to read it to see. She survived the thing. She lived a tough life, and it's all based on true story. Uh, I think particularly women readers will love it. I think any man reader that's got enough guts to say a woman may be better than me needs to get exposed to it.
Absolutely. And really quick as we close up here, what advice would you give to someone who wants to write a novel?
Well, the first thing is you got to write. Uh, you can sit around all you want to and think about. I want to do. Dennis Hambright, who an avid reader, a great writer, actually is the guy that got me started writing, and he kept saying, "Fred, sit down and write." And so that's what I start putting down. Don't worry about punctuation. Don't worry about dangling participles. Don't worry about it. Just start putting your thoughts down. And I believe that everybody's got a story. Everybody's got something that they're interested in or just want to express themselves about. The writing itself will kind of cleanse your soul. Uh, then you can always go back and edit. And if you want to, you can always hire an editor. Or if you want to, you can have 5 or 6 people read it and give their input to it. But the thing is answer the questions, do your research. Research, if you don't do research, will kill your book, because if you're talking about times and you put, like the guys, he's in 1850 and he answered his cell phone. I don't think that
Right.
turns readers off. Uh, so be sure that everything, and that's the way I write. Everything that I write, I think either did happen or by whatever chance there is could happen, and that's why I do so much research. I do about as much as I do writing. Spend about as much time.
That's a great practice. Yeah.
The next thing that Hemingway does, and this is one, he says you write every day, and then you go back before you ever write. You start where you go back to where you started the book and read until you start writing again. And he says never stop writing and if you don't have something you're going to write about the next day. In other words, you keep the flow, you keep it happening, and you keep it tied together. Now, I'm not a mystery writer. I'm not a science fiction writer. First of all, I don't think I'm smart enough to figure out things going to happen in the future. I have enough time problems dealing with what's happening now.
Right. Well, that is great advice. Thank you so much, Fred. And for our viewers and listeners who are watching and want to learn more about you, they can keep up with you on Facebook at facebook.com/Fred.staff2 and FredPstaff@yahoo.com if they want to drop your line via email.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from them. I would. I enjoy. Please enter just a question or something if you're going to do it on my email, because I get about 60, 70 emails a day, and a lot of them I just cancel out because I don't know who they are or what they're about. But if you'll do that, I'll be glad to respond to you.
Absolutely. Fred, thank you so much for your time. We are honored that you took a moment to chat with us about Bass Reeves, about your writing process, about your passion for writing novels, and we look forward to seeing and reading more books from you in the future.
I'm in a process. I look forward to sharing them with you.
Absolutely. Fred, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day. And again, happy holidays.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to you.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Bass Reeves, what a heroic, amazing American hero. We are so happy that Fred took time out to write these amazing books. Young Bass Reeves and Katie Quantrill, Bass Reeves Lawman, and Judge Parker and Bass Reeves. These books are all available on our website for purchase. You know, you want to pick up a copy of each today. And speaking of our website, we have a new look and are better than ever. Please visit us at www.forbookloversonly.com and see and feel our new look and greater functionality for both book lovers in search of new books and for authors who are looking for greater exposure for their books. Now, if you're a book lover but haven't yet joined our Book Lovers Club yet, we invite you to do so. It's simple. Just text the word book to 301-321-8887, and then you'll receive a message with a link. Click on the link and then fill in the form, and then click sign me up, and you're automatically a member. We're going to be having contests for members only, where you can win free books, coffee mugs, t-shirts, gift cards to your favorite coffee shop, and much, much more. We look forward to welcoming you, so feel free to join today. We're out of time, but thank you so much for stopping by. We want to thank Fred Staff again for chatting with us. What an amazing author, and we're so happy once again about him writing books about the great Bass Reeves. My name is Rob Brown, your internet radio host and chief book lover, and this is For Book Lovers Only Live Radio, where if you love books, we have a home for you. Take care. I'll see you next time.